Welcome to the Women's Agency Podcast, where we talk business, life, and empowered women. The show is brought to you by the Women's Agency, amplifying women's voices. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Women's Agency Podcast, where we do talk business, life, and women's power, but we also talk podcasting. I'm your host, Arlia Hoffman, and my mission is to help you amplify your voice and succeed on your own terms. Today, we're talking podcasting and specifically what goes into creating a successful show. The world of podcasting is blowing up, as you know, and it feels like everyone has a podcast, and it seems so easy just to create one, right? Everybody's got one, from news to true crime, to financial advice, to podcasts about podcasting. Here at the Women's Agency, we love to help women create a show that highlights what's important to them and moves their work forward, however they define that. This can be anything from coaching to financial planning to healthcare to astrology, to spirituality. The common theme, though, is these hosts have a unique spin on their topic and they're passionate about it. So what does it take to make it happen and to make a great show? I'm glad you asked. Today we'll be covering some of the questions that you really want to deeply consider before you start a podcast. And then if you make the decision to do so, what's going to be important to do first to get started right? And today I'm going to be using as my guide, the guide I created that's available on my website, thewomensagency.com. You can download that handy dandy checklist of some of the things I'm talking about today. And we might not get through all of it, but we will cover the rest of it in a future episode. We're going to start with how to know if podcasting is the right vehicle for you. First of all, podcasts have a lot of purposes, but generally they are part of your overall marketing strategy if you're a business or an entrepreneur or a solopreneur. It's a great tool for getting your word and your unique message out into the world. So if you have a message to share and you provide a service and you want to share information about the work that you do in the world, it could be for you. And you've got lots of options, right? You've got LinkedIn, you've got social media, you have YouTube, you have speaking engagements, books, even Substack and Patreon. So many different ways you can engage with the world with your message and or your product. Podcasting is unique in that, yes, it's a broadcast medium and it's very accessible, but I see it as distinct from many other avenues in that there's nothing like your voice, your literal voice, and the way you think and the way you bring your ideas to the world. There's never been anyone exactly like you. So if you capitalize on who you are and your authenticity and what lights you up, that's going to make for a successful podcast. But it requires that you be passionate about the topic. I was talking to a financial planner the other day who was struggling to isolate and hone in on her messaging. And I reminded her that there are certain hot button topics in her industry that she is passionate about. There are certain places that she sees that are the needs that she wants to fill. So I helped her find those topics that are her niche. You're going to need that because you have to have something that really drives you in your content. If you don't really care about what you're saying, it's going to come through. If you have an established business, or even a new business, if you've done the planning, then you have your marketing strategy down and you know what your talking points are, and you're going to want to work those. But hopefully, if it's been done properly, those are the things you are passionate about. So within the context of a business, that's how your passion comes through. Now, what kind of podcast might you be starting? Maybe you just want to start a podcast about tarot readings. The same rules apply. You want to do what you're passionate about. Maybe you like a particular deck, or you like 3 particular decks, and you're all about women's empowerment. So those are where your readings are going to be focused, and you're going to brand your podcast all around that theme. So the theme and the focus is very important. And then following that is, who's going to listen? Who are you talking to? That's huge too, because if you don't know who you're talking to, then the people you're talking to won't be listening. In my case, in the case of the Women's Agency, it's women entrepreneurs, small business owners who understand the value of podcasting and either are at the beginning stages of creating a podcast or have a podcast which isn't going the way they planned for it to go, and they're struggling with it. And maybe they're ready to create a podcast, but they're stymied and hampered by a lack of self-confidence or the resources and the skills to do so. Once you know what your focus is, what you're saying, and who you're talking to, then you've got the basis for the podcast itself. Everything else comes from there. The name, the branding, the content, the structure. Some other things you want to think about are, do you have the time and the resources to do this? It does take time, and it does take a little bit of money. It can be fairly inexpensive, or you can sink a lot of money into it. Really, these days, you can go either way. So it does not require a lot of money, but it does require some creativity, some intentionality, some planning, and then consistently showing up to the mic. So it's just like any other aspect of your business. You show up for breakfast, lunch, and dinner 3 times a day, plus snacks, whenever you eat. Whether you've cooked or somebody else has cooked, you don't forget usually to eat. That's an extreme example, but you do remember you have to put gas in your car. You have to pay for your insurance. You have to feed or walk your animals. Like, it becomes that routine in your life to do it. Otherwise, it becomes a project that might go 3 months, 6 months, and then you just fade out. Now, I will say that's okay if that happens, because in life, we just have to take risks and try things and see how they go. And sometimes they don't work, and sometimes we decide we don't like them. That's okay. I will also say you can have a short-term podcast. You can have a podcast that goes 10, 12 shows, maybe 3 weeks, maybe 6 months. And you can plan that this is going to be a short-term project based on this idea or this event. And that's totally cool. The important thing is knowing how you want to do it before you start, and planning. Speaking of which, planning. We've talked about planning the content and who your audience is. You definitely want to plan your content out as far as possible and plan how you're going to do it. So once you get all your technology together and your resources and your apps, do it for a couple of shows, document everything you do, figure out what works, and then write down your process and follow that process every time. If you do it by the seat of your pants, which I've done it, I've been there, it is so much harder to keep going because there's not a good process already. Some other questions to consider are, what is your technical ability? Do you have the time and resources to get it set up and keep it running? And do you know how to do that? Some of us don't have the inclination. Some of us don't care. I know for a number of people I've run into, it's just overwhelming and they do not want to deal with it. So they let us do it. And so you do have to consider, what is my technical capacity, my willingness, and how much of it am I willing to learn myself? Sometimes we can get a client up and running and they take it from there. And maybe we're just doing a little bit of work in the background for them. You don't have to do it alone, but you do have to consider, what's my ability, what's my willingness, and how much of this am I going to do myself? Another thing to consider is format. A lot of podcasts are one person talking into a microphone. Sometimes you've got two people that are co-hosts and they're having conversations. A lot of other shows are interview shows. And a related question is, what format will serve the goal of your podcast? And what is the goal? If your goal is to build your authority in your industry and in the marketplace, then that will drive your decisions about structure. If you want to build business relationships and use it as a business development tool, then you're probably going to want to have guests on, such as your existing clients, potential future clients, past clients, to help nurture all those relationships. I've seen this work beautifully and magically. So that's definitely something to consider. You can absolutely craft a podcast which showcases your voice, your knowledge, your wisdom, sending it out into the world. And it doesn't always have to be with you talking into a microphone. It can be through roundtable interviews. It can be through one-on-one interviews. It can be all sorts of formats. It can be a storytelling format for that matter. But building your authority comes not only through the content, but through the consistency of your message and the consistency of showing up to the microphone. So building your authority in your industry can easily be done through a podcast. So let's recap. You're going to want to consider what your topic is, what you're passionate about, what the content's going to be. If you have a business, is it consistent with your overall marketing and your mission in your business? Are you willing to invest the resources and the time to develop it? Do you have the technical ability to get it up and keep it running? Is it going to be a long-term or short-term podcast? What's the structure going to be? You're going to do it alone, with co-host, or as an interview show and a business development vehicle for your business. That's a lot to consider. So take some time. I would absolutely counsel you not to rush into it. If you feel like you have content burning a hole in your pocket, like you've just got to get it out there, go ahead and record. And just build up a library of recordings that you can use when you're ready to go. Or write it down, create a list of topics and people you want to talk to. That will absolutely help your planning. Creating a podcast can be extremely rewarding and absolutely a lot of fun if you do your homework first. And if you know where your own ability and your own willingness is to do the technical stuff behind the scenes. So know what you want to do and what your resources and capabilities are and what you desire to do. And then know you don't have to do it alone. The Women's Agency is here for people like you to help make that a reality and to make it wildly successful as a business development tool, someplace to build your authority in the world, and as a place to have fun and connect with your audience. I know that's a lot of information. Feel free to download the guide from thewomens'agency.com to get more information, to have that handy checklist. And I have a feeling this has started a lot of questions, but feel free to send me a message, Arlia, ARLIA, at thewomens'agency.com, and I'll be happy to talk you through those questions. I hope you have a great day. Next time we'll be talking about all the things you need to consider for technology and getting it set up the right way the first time. So join us next time, and we will see you here again on the Women's Agency. Thanks for joining us. This program is brought to you by the Women's Agency, a full-service podcast production and coaching firm in Atlanta, Georgia. Visit thewomens'agency.com for more.